My family called me selfish when I refused to give them $20,000. My father said family supported family. My mother cried and asked how I could turn my back on my own brother when I had just received the largest bonus of my career. Relatives who had forgotten my birthday for years suddenly remembered my phone number long enough to explain what I supposedly owed the Whitmore name. What none of them acknowledged was that I had already spent 28 years paying. I paid with birthdays abandoned because Miles had a competition. I paid with graduations overshadowed because he had an announcement. I paid with opportunities, holidays, and family photographs that somehow always had room for everyone except me. Then, on the night of my 28th birthday, my mother called just before midnight. For one foolish second, I believed she had remembered. Instead, she asked me to finance my brother's anniversary celebration. The amount she wanted made no sense. The venue had not been booked. The guest list kept changing. My brother was behaving like a man being chased rather than a man celebrating a promotion. And before my mother ended the call, I heard her whisper something she never intended me to hear. "She's already asking questions. Don't tell her anything else." That sentence was the beginning. Because once I traced where the $20,000 was supposed to go, I uncovered a secret my family had built around their golden son. But the money was only the first lie. Buried in an old wooden box were letters that would force me to reconsider every forgotten birthday, every empty chair, and every time my parents said they had simply been too busy to notice me. This is the story of the year I stopped paying for a place at a table that had never truly been set for me. It is also the story of what happened when I finally built a table of my own. The lobby of my apartment building smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh paint, the sort of carefully manufactured luxury scent designed to remind tenants that they were paying too much for rent. That Tuesday night, it only made the emptiness feel cleaner. My heels struck the marble floor in a steady rhythm as I crossed toward the elevator. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and I had spent more than 14 hours at Horizon Public Relations preparing the final presentation for one of the largest accounts our Chicago office had ever pursued. The meeting had gone better than anyone expected. Westfield Apparel had agreed to renew its contract and expand the campaign into 3 new markets. My boss, Lawrence Grant, had shaken my hand twice. The client's regional president had called my strategy one of the strongest brand recoveries she had seen in years. My colleagues congratulated me as I left. The receptionist wished me happy birthday. Jasmine Brooks, my closest friend at Horizon, had placed a card and a small bouquet on my desk that morning. Everyone seemed to remember except the people who had taught me that family was supposed to matter most. The elevator doors closed, reflecting a woman who should have looked accomplished. Clara Jane Whitmore, 28 years old that day, senior strategist, hair still pinned neatly despite the long hours. Navy blazer still crisp, makeup fading at the corners but mostly intact. I looked like someone who had built a stable life. I felt like a child waiting beside a window. I checked my phone as the elevator climbed. There were messages from colleagues, old classmates, and 2 clients. Nothing from my father. Nothing from my mother. Nothing from Miles. Not even a careless greeting prompted by a social media reminder. The elevator opened onto my floor. I unlocked my apartment and stepped into the soft glow of the lamp I had left on that morning. The apartment was everything I had once imagined independence would feel like. Warm cream walls, shelves lined with books, framed prints I had saved months to buy, a wide window overlooking the city lights. A kitchen where no one complained about the food I chose or asked why I had not made Miles's favorite dish instead. It should have felt like home. That night, it felt like a beautifully designed stage after the audience had left. On the coffee table sat a small white bakery box. I had bought it that morning from a cafe near Horizon, pretending it was merely breakfast. Inside was a vanilla cupcake with white frosting and one narrow candle pressed into the center. I removed my shoes and sat on the sofa. For a while, I stared at the cupcake. Then I lit the candle. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered. My voice was so soft that the room seemed to absorb it. I tried to laugh at myself. I was trusted to manage campaigns worth millions. Yet, I was sitting alone, whispering birthday wishes to a cupcake, because some part of me still expected my parents to call. The laugh tightened in my throat. My hand moved toward my phone before I could stop it. Perhaps someone had remembered during the elevator ride. Perhaps there was a message waiting. I opened social media. The first photograph froze me. Miles stood beneath a banner that read, "Congratulations on your promotion." He wore a charcoal suit, tailored perfectly across his shoulders. A champagne glass was raised in one hand. My father stood beside him, smiling with unmistakable pride. My mother held Miles's arm and looked at him as though he had personally rescued the family from disaster. The caption read, "The Whitmores celebrating another milestone for our star." I stared at the word star until it blurred. Then I began scrolling. There were photographs of Miles cutting a 3-tiered cake, Miles giving a speech, Miles surrounded by cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends I had not seen in years. Even Reverend Wallace from my parents' church was there. The timestamp showed the celebration had started 4 hours earlier. On my birthday, my father had commented, "Proud of the man, carrying the Whitmore legacy forward." My mother added, "Our family's future is in good hands." The replies filled with hearts and applause. No one mentioned me. I zoomed in on one photograph, although I did not know why. Everyone around Miles looked joyful. Miles did not. His smile was polished, but his eyes were focused on a phone hidden near his waist. In another picture, my father leaned close to his ear while Miles's jaw tightened. A third image showed him stepping away from the guests, one hand pressed against his forehead. I told myself it meant nothing. Maybe work had already become demanding. Maybe his new position came with responsibilities he had not expected. Still, the celebration looked too carefully arranged. It felt less like joy, and more like a performance staged for witnesses. I continued scrolling until memories began rising without permission. I was 11 again, sitting in a corner booth at Angelo's Pizza, my legs swinging above the floor. My parents had promised to return from Miles's debate competition before the candles were lit. The waitress kept glancing toward the entrance. 1 hour passed, then another. When my parents finally arrived, Miles carried a trophy taller than my cake. My mother rushed toward him for another photograph before she looked at me. I blew out a candle that had melted nearly flat into the frosting. At 17, I spent my birthday weekend at Grandma Eleanor's house because my parents were touring universities with Miles. "It's his future, Clara," Dad had explained, as though my life were a temporary inconvenience. At my college graduation, I received highest honors. My parents remained politely attentive until Miles stood during dinner and announced his engagement to Jessica. Within seconds, my degree vanished beneath conversations about flowers, venues, and guest lists. For years, I had described these moments as unfortunate coincidences. Watching the promotion photographs, I understood they were not coincidences. They were choices repeated until everyone began treating them as tradition. The clock on the wall moved toward midnight. I wiped my eyes and blew out the candle without making a wish. At 2 minutes before midnight, my phone vibrated. The screen displayed Mom. My heart reacted before my mind could stop it. I answered too quickly. "Hello, Clara, darling." Her voice was bright and almost breathless. Music and laughter echoed behind her. "I'm glad I caught you." I waited. Perhaps this was the surprise. Perhaps she had deliberately waited until the final minutes because she wanted to be the last person to wish me a happy birthday. "I wanted to talk to you about something important," she continued. "Your father and I are arranging a little anniversary celebration for Miles and Jessica next month." My hand tightened around the phone. "A celebration?" "Nothing excessive. Family and a few close friends. We thought you could help with the catering and decorations. You are so good at events and presentation." The clock changed to midnight. My birthday ended. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart. Yesterday was my birthday." There was silence. Not the silence of someone suddenly devastated by her mistake. The silence of someone choosing the safest response. "Oh," she finally said. "Oh, honey." With Miles's promotion and all the planning, it slipped my mind. Behind her, someone laughed loudly. I looked at the unlit cupcake. "It slipped your mind, Do not sound like that, Clara. You know how busy the week has been. We will make it up to you. She immediately returned to the anniversary. We are considering the Oakmont Conservatory. Their windows are beautiful, and your father believes the venue and catering can be managed for a reasonable amount. What amount? She hesitated. We have not finalized everything. Then why are you asking me to pay? I am not asking you to pay for everything. We expect everyone to contribute according to their ability. Everyone. That word had always meant me when money was involved. How much do you expect from me? We can discuss the number tomorrow. Tell me now. Her voice became cautious. Approximately $20,000. I stared at the dark window. For a small anniversary party? It covers more than food. There are arrangements, deposits, and other obligations. What obligations? Clara? Must everything be an interrogation? When you call me at midnight asking for $20,000, yes. My father's voice sounded faintly in the background. Get it settled, Margaret. Mom covered the receiver, but not quickly enough. She is asking too many questions, she whispered. My father answered. Then stop giving her details. My mother returned. You must be exhausted. We will speak tomorrow. Mom, where is the money going? The celebration. That was not an answer. It is late. She moved the phone away, but the call did not disconnect immediately. My father asked, did she agree? Not yet. You should have made the obligation clear. She is already asking questions. Do not tell her anything else. The line went dead. I remained on the sofa with the phone pressed against my ear. For 28 years, I had believed my family overlooked me because Miles naturally demanded more attention. That night, I heard something different. Planning. Secrecy. Fear. My birthday had ended without a genuine wish from my parents. But before I went to sleep, I understood that the forgotten birthday was no longer the only thing I needed to confront. There was a reason the amount was so specific. And my family expected me to pay before I discovered it. The next morning, I dressed as though nothing had happened. That was a skill I had perfected years earlier. When I was hurt, I became more polished. When I was angry, my voice grew calmer. When I wanted to scream, I organized information into neat columns and presented it professionally. At Horizon, competence was respected. At home, competence was a reason to expect more from me. I arrived before 8, made coffee strong enough to burn my throat, and opened my email. A message from accounting waited near the top. Performance bonus approved. I clicked it. The amount was $75,000 before taxes. For several seconds, I simply stared. The Westfield campaign had increased the client's quarterly revenue by more than 40% and preserved several jobs within our company. I had led a team through months of deadlines, rebuilt the client's media strategy, and defended the campaign before executives who had initially wanted to cancel it. I had earned the money. It was not a family windfall. It was not Miles's emergency reserve. It was mine. A small sense of pride began to rise. Then my phone vibrated. A notification appeared from a new group called Whitmore Family Celebration. I frowned. I did not remember joining it. My mother had created the group less than an hour earlier. Judging by the conversation, she had probably intended to discuss contributions privately before, including me, but she had added my number while setting up the participants. My father's message appeared near the top. We should expect Clara to contribute significantly. At least $20,000. My mother replied. Agreed. She has no children and just received that large bonus. It is time Kara supported the family properly. Chara. She had misspelled my name while discussing how much of my money she intended to use. I read the message twice. Then I scrolled. Aunt Linda offered to cover flowers. Cousin Elaine volunteered to bring wine. An uncle I barely knew said he would pay for the anniversary cake. Each contribution was limited and specific. Mine was $20,000. My father added, Miles carries responsibilities Clara does not understand. She should be grateful she is in a position to help. Another message appeared, then disappeared almost immediately. I saw only part of it before my mother deleted it. This is a family emergency. My pulse quickened. An anniversary party was not an emergency. I took screenshots of the entire conversation. A knock sounded against my office door. Jasmine stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. Her dark curls were twisted into a loose bun, and her expression changed the moment she saw my face. "You look like you are about to fire someone or disappear into another country." She placed 1 cup on my desk. "What happened?" I handed her the phone. She read silently. Then her eyes widened. $20,000? Yes. For an anniversary party? That is the story. Jasmine scrolled farther. "They spelled your name wrong. I noticed. That should not be the worst part, but somehow it is." I leaned back. "They have not shown me a contract, a budget, or a guest list." "Then, they are not asking for a contribution. They are asking for a transfer." I opened the Oakmont Conservatory website. Its event packages were listed publicly. The venue was elegant, but not enormous. Even a generous anniversary package for a substantial guest count did not approach $20,000 unless every luxury upgrade was added. I called the event office from my work phone. A coordinator answered. I explained that my family was considering an anniversary celebration and asked for a general estimate. "For how many guests?" she asked. "Approximately 40. Our standard package for that size begins around $6,000. The final amount depends on menu and bar selections. Has a Whitmore event been reserved for next month?" She searched. "I do not see a reservation under that name." "No deposit?" There was an inquiry from a Margaret Whitmore, but no date was held and no contract was issued. I thanked her and ended the call. Jasmine had listened from across the desk. 6,000, she said. "Approximately. And they want 20. "Yes." She folded her arms. "What exactly did you hear at the end of the call?" I repeated my mother's words. "She is already asking questions. Do not tell her anything else." Jasmine's expression hardened. "Do not send $1. Before I could answer, my office phone rang. The display showed Miles Whitmore. Jasmine mouthed, "Of course." I answered. "Clara speaking." "Hey sis." Miles's voice carried the smooth warmth he used whenever he wanted something. "Happy belated birthday." The words arrived so casually that they hurt more than silence. "Thank you. Yesterday got insane. I saw the pictures." "The promotion party?" "Yes. It was Mom's idea. You know how she gets." I thought of the tension in his face. "What do you need, Miles?" He laughed softly. "Straight to business. I am at work. That is why I am calling. You know Olivia Grant at Regent Tech, correct? I have met her professionally. Could you arrange dinner? For what purpose? My firm has been trying to speak with Regent's treasury team for months. Their account would be enormous for us. You want me to use a client relationship to help you. I want my sister to make an introduction. Those are not necessarily the same thing." His tone tightened. "Come on, Clara. Family helping family." The phrase sounded rehearsed. "How urgent is it?" "I need the meeting this week." "Why?" "My new position includes performance expectations." "You were promoted yesterday." "The announcement was yesterday. The process has been ongoing. So the position is conditional." Silence. Then he exhaled. "Everything is conditional in finance." I looked at the family messages. "Does this have anything to do with the anniversary?" "What?" "The $20,000. His answer came too quickly. "No. I have not told you what I know. You do not know anything." Jasmine raised her eyebrows. I kept my voice even. "Send me a written explanation of what Regent needs and why an introduction would be appropriate. I will review it." "Clara, I need a favor, not a compliance procedure. My professional reputation is not a family favor." His warmth disappeared. "You have always made things more difficult than necessary. And you have always expected me to make things easier for you." Neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Dad is already upset about the money. I have not refused, but you will." I am asking questions. In this family, that usually means the same thing. He ended the call. I slowly replaced the receiver. Jasmine leaned forward. "He is frightened." "Yes." "He denied a connection before you explained what connection you meant." "Yes." She nodded toward my computer. "Then stop treating this like a family misunderstanding. Treat it like one of your client crises." I opened a blank document. At the top, I wrote, "Known facts." The proposed party had no contract. The venue estimate was far below the amount requested. My parents described the situation as urgent. Miles desperately needed a major client. His promotion appeared to have conditions attached. My mother did not want me asking where the money would go. For years, I had approached my family's behavior as an emotional mystery. Why did they choose Miles? Why was I never enough? Why did their love always seem to arrive with an invoice? That morning, I stopped searching for emotional explanations. I began following evidence. Jasmine expected me to confront my parents immediately. I surprised both of us by doing nothing. For several days, I did not answer the family group chat. I did not call my mother. I did not introduce Miles to Regent Tech. Instead, I worked. I finalized Westfield's campaign calendar, reviewed the bonus documents, and met with my financial advisor. The $75,000 bonus sounded enormous until taxes were considered. Fortunately, I had spent 6 years building savings. I had paid off my student loans, carried no credit card debt, and avoided the expensive lifestyle many colleagues adopted after their first promotion. For years, I had saved because security felt safer than hope. Now my savings offered me a choice. On Friday afternoon, Jasmine entered my office, carrying her coat. "You have been disturbingly calm. I am thinking. That is what worries me." I turned my laptop toward her. A property listing filled the screen. The house stood north of Chicago, near the Michigan shoreline. 2 stories, weathered sage siding, a wraparound deck, wide windows facing the water. "You are buying a house?" "I am considering one." "Because you are angry?" "No." I looked at the photograph. I keep thinking about all the energy I spend preparing for the next family emergency. What would happen if I used that energy to build something that belonged to me? Jasmine studied me. "That sounds less like revenge and more like a plan." The following morning, I drove north. Chicago's towers gave way to lower buildings, fields, and long stretches of road. September air moved coolly through the open windows. The farther I drove, the more my shoulders relaxed. My realtor, Dana Morales, met me beside a gravel driveway. The house looked older in person. The siding needed paint. Several deck boards had warped. The kitchen belonged to another decade, and the upstairs bathroom was covered in peach-colored tile. Then I opened the balcony door in the main bedroom. Lake Michigan stretched beyond the trees, silver blue beneath the afternoon sky. Wind lifted my hair. For a long moment, I heard nothing except water and distant birds. No demands, no comparison. No one explaining why Miles needed more. Dana joined me. "The structure appears sound, but the inspection will tell us more. It has remained on the market because buyers want something already renovated. I do not mind work. Do you want time to think?" I looked at the water again. "I want to make an offer." We submitted an offer below the asking price, with an inspection contingency. The seller countered. We negotiated. Over the following weeks, my evenings filled with mortgage documents, bank statements, and insurance estimates. The inspector found aging pipes beneath the kitchen and moisture damage near one section of the deck. Instead of pretending the flaws did not exist, I renegotiated the price and created a repair budget. There was something almost comforting about naming problems honestly. In my family, problems were hidden until someone else absorbed the cost. With the house, every weakness was identified, priced, and addressed. During the financing process, my mother continued sending messages. She sent photographs of floral arches, linen samples, and table settings. She asked whether I preferred salmon or beef for the anniversary dinner. She forwarded a sample invitation despite having no confirmed venue. Each time I requested the contract, she changed the subject. Finally, she wrote, "Your father is handling the paperwork. We simply need your contribution confirmed." I replied, "I will not confirm any amount without a complete budget and invoice." She called within minutes. "Clara, this is becoming embarrassing." "For whom?" "For the entire family. Your aunt keeps asking why you have not chosen decorations." "I am not choosing decorations for an event with no reservation. We may use another location." "Which one?" "Your father is negotiating." "Then there is nothing for me to pay." Her voice sharpened. Why must you make every family matter transactional? You called me about $20,000 on my birthday. Silence. Then she said, I am disappointed in the woman you have become. The sentence stayed with me for less time than it once would have. 2 days later, Miles called. Have you contacted Olivia? No. Clara, I explained this is urgent. You explained that your position includes performance targets. Regent would satisfy a significant portion of them. Then your business development team can contact Regent through official channels. You know that a warm introduction changes everything. I also know that using a client relationship to benefit my brother creates a conflict. His patience broke. If I do not secure a major account this quarter, people will question whether I deserved the promotion. That was the first honest thing he had said. Did you deserve it? The silence between us became heavy. Eventually he said, You have no idea how much pressure I am carrying. You are right. No one in the family discusses your pressure, they only celebrate your results. For a brief moment, I heard vulnerability in his breathing. Then it disappeared. Make the introduction. No. He ended the call. By the middle of October, my mortgage was approved. The appraisal supported the negotiated price. The title search returned clean. I reviewed every closing document with the same attention I gave client contracts. I used part of my savings and part of the after-tax bonus for a 20% down payment, closing costs, and a repair reserve. The remaining money stayed in my account. I had not emptied myself to prove love. Closing was scheduled for the final week of October. The evening before, my mother sent a message with an attachment. Here is the final venue balance. Please transfer your share by Friday. I downloaded the file. Before I opened it, the message disappeared. Margaret Whitmore deleted this message. The attachment remained in my downloads. It was not a venue invoice. At the top was the logo of North Shore Lending. Beneath it, notice of default and final cure amount. Borrowers, Richard Whitmore and Margaret Whitmore. The property address belonged to my parents' Lakeshore Drive residence. The amount required to cure was $19,842.16. Nearly the exact amount they wanted from me. My hands went cold. The notice referred to missed payments on a home equity line of credit opened earlier that year. My parents did not merely want help arranging a party. Their house was connected to a debt. I did not know why the line had been opened. I did not know how Miles was involved. But the amount was no coincidence. Minutes later, my mother called. Did you open the attachment? Yes. That was the wrong file. I noticed. I was switching between the sample estimate and a document your father forwarded. They were beside each other in my recent files. Her explanation sounded plausible. Her panic told me the mistake mattered. What is the loan for? That is private. You sent me a default notice while asking me for the same amount. It has nothing to do with you. Then stop asking me to pay it. She inhaled sharply. Delete the document. I will not distribute it, but I am keeping the message you sent me. You are behaving like an enemy. No, Mom. I am behaving like someone you tried to deceive. She ended the call. The next afternoon, I signed the closing documents for my house. Dana handed me the keys. They felt cold and solid in my palm. We took a photograph beside the front steps. I agreed that she could place it on her professional page as part of the sold property announcement, provided she did not include my workplace or personal details. I did not expect anyone in my family to see it. Cousin Elaine followed nearly every real estate page in the region. Within 2 hours, my mother sent the photograph back to me. Below it was a single sentence. How could you do this without telling us? Then my father wrote, We know what you did. I stood in the empty living room of the lake house, surrounded by worn floors and afternoon light. My family had discovered the house. But the more important discovery was mine. The amount they demanded for Miles's anniversary matched the amount required to rescue their loan. The celebration was connected to something much larger. And my father was already on his way to make sure I stopped asking why. My father came to Horizon the following Monday. He did not call. He did not ask whether I was available. He crossed the lobby in a tailored black suit, silver hair perfectly arranged, carrying the authority that had frightened me since childhood. The receptionist called my office. "Clara, your father is here. He says it is urgent." Through the glass wall, I saw several employees glance toward reception. I closed my laptop and walked out. "Dad." His eyes moved over me without warmth. "A lake house?" His voice carried across the room. "Not here. You bought a lake house while your family is facing a crisis?" Several conversations stopped. Heat rose beneath my collar, but I kept my expression still. "This is my workplace." "Then behave like a responsible professional instead of a selfish child." I opened the nearest meeting room. Inside. Perhaps it was my tone. Perhaps it was the people watching. He followed. I closed the door but left the glass blinds open. I wanted witnesses if his behavior worsened. He placed both hands on the conference table. "Sell it." I stared at him. "What?" "Sell the property. You had no business making such a reckless decision while we were counting on your support." "You were not counting on my support. You were counting on my obedience." His face reddened. "Your mother explained the anniversary." "There is no anniversary booking. That is still being finalized. The Oakmont Conservatory has no contract. Their estimated cost is far below $20,000. His expression changed. "Only slightly. But I saw it. And the supposed venue balance came from North Shore Lending." My father looked toward the glass wall. "Your mother sent a private document by mistake. She sent it directly to the person she was asking to pay the same amount. That does not give you the right to interfere. You came into my office and ordered me to sell my house. You made it my concern." He turned back to me. "Your brother made an error." "What kind of error?" "Miles acted in good faith." "That is not an answer." "He identified an investment opportunity, a short-term redevelopment project. The return was expected to be substantial." "With whose money?" "With family resources. The home equity line." My father remained silent. "How much?" "That is irrelevant." "How much did you borrow?" $80,000. The number struck me harder than I expected. My parents had borrowed $80,000 against their home for one of Miles's opportunities. They had criticized every professional risk I had ever taken. They had questioned whether public relations was a real career. Yet they had placed their house behind an investment because Miles recommended it. What happened? The managing partner encountered difficulties. The investment failed. It is delayed. The lender says you missed payments. A temporary issue. Why were the payments missed? His voice became clipped. Miles expected the project to distribute funds before they came due, and it did not. No. The $20,000 is the amount required to cure the default. We need time. So the anniversary contribution was a cover. It was a practical way to involve you without exposing private family matters. For a moment, I could only stare at him. You created a fake family celebration because you were ashamed to admit Miles had endangered the house. Your brother did not endanger anything. The project was sound. The bank disagrees. Do not be insolent. You lied to me. We protected the family. You protected Miles's image. My father straightened. You received a substantial bonus. $20,000 will not ruin you. That is not the point. It is precisely the point. You can solve this. Then why did you not ask honestly? Because you have always resented your brother. We knew you would use his difficulty to humiliate him. I felt something settle inside me. You were willing to humiliate me into paying so Miles would not have to admit he failed. You are twisting the situation. No, I am finally saying it accurately. He moved closer. If the account is not cured, the bank could freeze the credit line and begin collection proceedings. Your mother has barely slept. And Miles? He is under enormous pressure, which explains Regent Tech. My father's eyes narrowed. What do you know about Regent? Miles asked me to arrange access to their marketing director. He needs one significant account to secure his new position. The position you already celebrated publicly. The announcement was necessary. For confidence? For reputation. Not truth. His palm struck the table. The sound echoed. I did not move. My father had always relied on volume when authority failed. For most of my life, it worked. I will not give you $20,000, I said. His mouth tightened. I will not introduce Miles to Regent Tech. I will not sell my house. I will not lie about an anniversary party that does not exist. You are willing to let your parents lose their home? No. You are asking me to accept responsibility for a decision you made with Miles. We made that decision for the family. You made it for the child you consider the family. The words landed between us. My father looked toward the door. You will regret this. I regret many things. Asking questions is not one of them. He left without answering. As the meeting room door opened, every employee in reception looked down at a screen or document. Lawrence Grant stood near the hallway. He waited until my father entered the elevator, then approached. Are you all right? No, I said honestly. But I will be. He nodded. Take the rest of the morning. I returned to my office and closed the door. My hands began shaking only after I sat down. For years, I had imagined confronting my father as a moment of triumph. In reality, it felt like grief. I wanted him to surprise me. I wanted him to hear the truth and become the father I had spent 28 years hoping existed beneath his pride. Instead, he confirmed that my value was measured by how efficiently I could repair Miles's mistakes. My phone rang. Miles. I answered. What did you say to Dad? He demanded. The truth. He came to my office furious. He came to mine first. You embarrassed him in front of your coworkers. He embarrassed himself. You do not understand the situation. I understand that you convinced our parents to borrow $80,000 against their house. Silence. Then he said, Dad told you. He told me enough. The investment was legitimate. Then why are they in default? The developer delayed the distribution. Did you review the payment schedule before recommending the loan? I reviewed everything. Apparently not. His breathing sharpened. You always think you are smarter than everyone. No, I think your mistakes stop being private when I am expected to pay for them. I was going to fix it. With Regent Tech, that would help. So the promotion party was staged to make everyone believe the position was secure. I was promoted. Conditionally. That is common in finance. Is using your sister's professional relationships to satisfy the condition also common? Stop acting morally superior. I am not the one who helped create a fake anniversary expense. That was Mom and Dad's idea, but you knew. He did not answer. Does Jessica know? No. The speed of his answer gave me pause. Your wife does not know your parents' home is at risk because of your investment? She knows the project was delayed. She does not know everything. So everyone is protecting your image. You have no idea what it is like to carry Dad's expectations. The statement nearly made me laugh. Then I realized he meant it. Miles had been favored, celebrated, and protected. He had also been shaped into a performance. Our parents had made him the center, then demanded that he never fail. That did not excuse him. But it explained the frightened man in the promotion photographs. You could have told me, I said. Would you have helped? If you had admitted the truth and taken responsibility, I might have helped Mom and Dad create a repayment plan. I would not have transferred $20,000 to preserve a lie. We do not have time for your principles. You had time before the payments were missed. His voice turned cold. If the bank acts, Dad will blame you. He can blame me. Mom will never forgive you. She forgot my birthday before I refused the money. That is unfair. No, Miles. This is the first fair conversation we have ever had. He became quiet. Then he said, You have always wanted to see me fail. There it was. The story my family had written for me. Clara was jealous. Clara was difficult. Clara resented Miles because she could not tolerate his success. I never wanted you to fail, I said. I wanted your success to stop requiring my disappearance. I ended the call. That evening, I drove north. The lake house had no proper furniture yet, only a folding chair, a small lamp, and a blanket spread across the bedroom floor. I sat beside the balcony doors and listened to the wind move over the water. My father had said I would be responsible if the family lost everything. I replayed the facts. I had not opened the credit line. I had not recommended the investment. I had not missed the payments. I had not invented the party. For once, I refused to accept responsibility simply because someone placed it in my hands. The next morning, a formal invitation arrived from my mother. Sunday dinner, family only, attendance expected. At the bottom, she had written, Bring whatever proof you believe justifies what you are doing to us. I read the sentence twice. Then I opened one of the boxes I had carried from my apartment. Inside were 3 old photo albums. My mother wanted proof. I had 28 years of it. The Whitmore house stood on Lakeshore Drive like a monument to appearances. 3 stories of gray stone, white columns, tall windows that reflected the city without revealing what happened inside. As a child, I believed the house represented safety. As an adult, I understood that it represented presentation. Everything was polished. Everything was arranged. Nothing uncomfortable remained visible for long. I arrived for Sunday dinner, carrying 3 albums, a folder, and a worn diary page. My father opened the door. "You are late." I checked the clock in the foyer. "I am 4 minutes early." He stepped aside without answering. My mother appeared near the dining room wearing pearls and a pale blue dress. Her eyes were slightly red, though her makeup remained perfect. "Clara," she said softly, "we have been so worried." I looked at the albums in my arms. "No, you have not." Her expression tightened. Miles and Jessica were seated in the living room. Jessica rose and hugged me awkwardly. "I heard there has been a misunderstanding." Miles looked away. He had not told her. Dinner was served with the ceremonial precision my mother used whenever she wanted to pretend a crisis was not happening. Beef Wellington sat at the center of the table. Miles's favorite. My mother poured wine. My father discussed the markets. Jessica tried to speak about a new design project at her company, but my father redirected the conversation toward Miles's promotion. For several minutes, the old pattern performed itself perfectly. Then dessert arrived. My father set down his coffee cup. "We need to settle this." "I agree." His eyes moved to the albums beside my chair. "What is that?" "Proof." My mother folded her hands. "Clara, no one asked you to turn dinner into a trial. You asked me to bring whatever justified my decision. I meant your financial reasoning." "My financial reasoning is simple. The money is mine." My father's jaw tightened. "You know what is at stake." "Yes. Your home is connected to a debt created for Miles's investment." Jessica turned sharply toward her husband. "What?" Miles closed his eyes. My mother whispered, "Richard, I told you she would do this." Jessica stared at Miles. "What debt?" "We will discuss it later," he said. "This concerns our finances. We discuss it now." My father struck the table lightly with 2 fingers. "This is precisely why we kept the matter private. Clara turns every difficulty into an attack on her brother." I reached for the first album. "This is Miles." I placed it in the center of the table. My mother recognized it immediately. Despite herself, her expression softened. I opened the cover. Page after page showed Miles surrounded by celebration. At 6, he stood beneath balloons shaped like airplanes. At 10, he held a new bicycle beside a cake decorated like a football field. At 16, he leaned against the first car my parents bought him. At 18, he smiled beneath university banners while my father placed a proud hand on his shoulder. There were professional photographs from birthdays, graduations, debate competitions, and family vacations. Miles looked through the pages slowly. My father frowned. "What is your point?" I opened to the photograph of Miles receiving car keys. "Do you remember this?" "Of course," my mother said. "He worked hard. He had failed his driving test the previous week." "That is irrelevant." I slid the second album across the table. "This one is mine." My mother opened it. The first page was blank. So was the second. The third held a photograph of me at 11, sitting alone beside a melted cupcake. The waitress at Angelo's had taken it because she felt sorry for me. Another page showed Grandma Eleanor beside me at 17, holding a homemade cake in her kitchen. There was a college graduation photograph taken by Jasmine. A picture of Mrs. Bennett, my elderly neighbor, hugging me on my 27th birthday. Several work events, nothing else. No family parties. No vacations. No professional portrait. No photographs of my parents standing proudly beside me. My mother turned another blank page. "We must have more somewhere." "You do not." "Of course we do." I searched every box Grandma left behind. "That is everything." My father leaned back. "Not every occasion was photographed." "You photographed every occasion involving Miles." "That is not true." I opened the third album. Vacations. Disney World. The Grand Canyon. London. Hawaii. A ski resort in Colorado. Miles appeared in every photograph. I appeared in none. Jessica looked toward me. You were not on those trips? Sometimes there was supposedly not enough money for everyone. Sometimes Miles had a schedule they needed to accommodate. Sometimes I was told I preferred staying with Grandma. My mother shook her head. You loved staying with her. I loved her. That did not mean I wanted to be excluded. Excluded is a cruel word. It was a cruel experience. I opened the folder. Inside was a spreadsheet. I had reconstructed major family expenses from records Grandma kept, old conversations and information my parents discussed openly over the years. University support, cars, wedding expenses, travel, emergency transfers, down payments. The figures were not complete, but the pattern was unmistakable. Miles had received hundreds of thousands of dollars in direct support. My total was a fraction of that. My father barely looked at the document. Families do not keep score. Families that treat one child like an investment and the other like an emergency fund should expect an audit. Miles flinched. I reached for the diary page. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting uneven. I wrote this when I was 9. My mother's face changed. I read aloud. Grandma called Mom today to remind her, my birthday is next Thursday. Mom said she knew, but I heard her ask Dad what they should buy. Maybe next year they will remember without Grandma telling them. The spoon slipped from my mother's fingers and struck her plate. The sound was small. Everyone heard it. My father's eyes moved toward her. Enough, he said. I looked at him. Why? This has become melodramatic. Because I mentioned Grandma? Because you are using the dead to attack the living. I am reading my diary. You have always interpreted events negatively. I studied my mother. She had gone pale. Grandma reminded you often, did she not? My mother lifted her napkin. She was an involved grandmother. That was not my question. My father pushed his chair back. The past cannot be changed. We did what we believed was best. For whom? For the family. Miles, for the child carrying the greatest responsibility. There it was again. The family and Miles as interchangeable ideas. What responsibility did he have at 9 years old? Had Biznot. My father's face reddened. He was the heir to the Whitmore name. Jessica stared at him. My mother whispered. Richard. He continued, too angry to stop. He was expected to carry the family forward. He required preparation, opportunity, and attention. You were independent. Easier to love. That is not what I said. Easier to ignore? The room became silent. My father looked directly at me. Yes. My mother covered her mouth. Miles lowered his glass. My father seemed almost relieved by the brutality of his honesty. You want the truth? We favored Miles. He carried expectations you did not. You adapted. You had your grandmother. You had school. You had your career. You did not require the same investment. The words entered me. They should have destroyed something. Instead, they settled into the place where hope had once lived. My mother began crying. We never meant for it to become this. I looked at her. 28 years do not happen accidentally. It just happened. No, choices happened. She looked away. I gathered the folder and diary page, but left the albums on the table. My father frowned. Where are you going? Home. This is your home. No. The word felt clean. This was where I learned how little space I occupied. My home is somewhere else. My mother rose. Clara, please. We can repair this. You still have not apologized. I said we did not mean. That is not an apology. Miles finally spoke. Clara. I turned. He looked different. Not transformed. Not innocent. Unsettled. His hand rested on the empty album. I did not know. You never asked. He lowered his eyes. I walked toward the foyer. Behind me, my father said. If you leave now, do not expect us to beg you to return. I stopped at the door. I spent most of my life waiting for that. Then I stepped outside. Cold November air struck my face. As I crossed the circular driveway, I glanced back through the dining room window. My parents remained at the table. Jessica stood beside Miles, speaking with sharp movements. Miles had turned toward an old writing desk near the wall. He opened the narrow top drawer and removed a small brass key. I recognized it. It had belonged to Grandma Eleanor. After her death, my father packed her correspondence and personal papers into storage. Probate had closed long ago, but several boxes had never been sorted because he claimed they contained nothing important. Miles stared at the key. Then he looked at my empty album. He walked toward the hallway, leading to the storage room. For the first time, the golden child seemed willing to examine the structure that had kept him above me. I did not know what he would find. I only knew my mother had been afraid when I mentioned Grandma's reminders. Walking away did not make me feel free immediately. For the first several nights, I barely slept. My father's voice followed me into the dark. You were easier to ignore. I had imagined that hearing him admit the truth would make me feel vindicated. Instead, the admission opened every old wound at once. I questioned myself. Had I been too harsh? Should I have helped, despite the lie? Was my refusal a boundary, or had it become punishment? The following Tuesday, I searched for therapists near my office. By the next week, I sat across from Dr. Rebecca Levine in a quiet room painted soft gray. She was in her late 50s, with kind eyes and a way of listening that made silence feel useful. "Why are you here?" she asked. I began with the money, then the birthday, then the albums. Within 20 minutes, I was crying so hard I could barely speak. "I thought confronting them would fix something," I said. "Instead, I feel like I destroyed the last possibility that they might love me properly." Dr. Levine waited until I could breathe. "You did not destroy the possibility," she said. "You stopped sustaining the illusion. That does not feel better." Truth rarely feels better at the beginning. She asked about Grandma Eleanor. I told her Grandma remembered every birthday. She sent cards before I could read. She attended school events when my parents were occupied with Miles. She kept photographs, newspaper clippings, and copies of my certificates. "She used to call my parents to remind them," I said. "I assumed they were busy. Do you still believe that?" I thought of my mother dropping the spoon. I do not know. Therapy did not offer dramatic answers. It gave me smaller tools. Name the feeling before reacting. Separate guilt from responsibility. Do not treat another person's anger as proof that you are wrong. Ask whether a decision protects your peace or merely punishes someone else. Those questions changed how I approached the lake house. Initially, I wanted to renovate everything quickly, as though completed rooms would prove I had escaped. Instead, I slowed down. Jasmine came every other weekend with groceries, wine, and strong opinions about paint colors. Devon Hale from my office brought a toolbox and taught me how to replace warped deck boards. Mrs. Bennett, my elderly neighbor from Chicago, visited with a quilt stitched in shades of blue and green. "Every real home needs something made with love," she said. I placed the quilt across the sofa. In the living room, I hung the framed Excellence in Strategy award my father had once called cute. Beside it, I placed my college graduation photograph. Not to prove anything to my parents. To honor the woman who had achieved those things without their applause. By December, the lake house no longer felt like an escape route. It felt like a life. My parents continued calling. My mother left messages saying she was worried about my emotional condition. My father sent one text. "The bank situation is being handled. Your behavior remains unacceptable." I did not answer. The home equity account was eventually brought current without my money. My parents sold part of an investment portfolio, and Miles entered a formal repayment agreement with them. The emergency had always been solvable. They had simply preferred solving it with my sacrifice. Jessica learned the full extent of the debt after the album dinner. She temporarily moved into her sister's apartment and required Miles to disclose every account, liability, and investment connected to their marriage. For several weeks, Miles sent me nothing. Then, shortly before Christmas, a message appeared. "Do you remember where Grandma kept her letters?" I did remember. Grandma had a dark wooden box with a small brass lock. She kept recipes, birthday cards, and copies of important correspondence inside. When she died, I asked whether I could help sort her papers. My father said he would handle everything. I replied, "Why are you asking?" Miles answered almost an hour later. "I found the box in storage. The key fits, but the lock is damaged." I did not respond. 2 days later, another message appeared. "Did Grandma ever tell you she wrote to Mom about you?" My chest tightened. I typed several answers, then erased them. Finally, I wrote, "She said she reminded them about birthdays and school events." Miles replied, "There may be more than reminders." I placed the phone face down. I was not ready to let his discovery become another reason to return to the family's chaos. Dr. Levine agreed. "Information can wait until you are prepared to receive it," she said. "Urgency is often used by people who benefit when you have no boundaries." In early January, I hosted my first housewarming party. The guest list was small. Jasmine arrived first, and immediately took control of the kitchen. Devin brought 2 bottles of wine and a replacement drill bit he insisted I needed. Lawrence Grant stopped by with a card that read, "To celebrating the life you built." Mrs. Bennett placed oatmeal cookies on the dining table and criticized my furniture arrangement until I moved a chair closer to the window. For several hours, the house filled with laughter. No one asked what I could provide for them. No one compared my achievements to someone else's. No one redirected the conversation when I spoke. Near sunset, we carried glasses onto the deck. The lake reflected the winter sky in silver and pale violet. Jasmine raised her glass. "To Clara, who finally spent money on something that does not call only when it needs a favor." Everyone laughed. So did I. The sound felt unfamiliar. Not because I rarely laughed, because I rarely laughed without monitoring whether someone else was comfortable. Later, after everyone left, I moved through the rooms gathering empty glasses and folded napkins. The quiet did not feel lonely. It felt peaceful. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. Dozens of calls and messages had accumulated from relatives after photographs of the gathering appeared online. Some accused me of excluding my parents. Others said I had humiliated Miles. Cousin Elaine wrote, "Your mother says you are having some kind of breakdown." I deleted nothing. Dr. Levine had suggested keeping records without responding emotionally. At the bottom of the notifications was a message from Miles. It included a photograph. Grandma's wooden box sat open on the desk in my father's study. Several envelopes lay beside it. Across the top envelope, in Grandma's handwriting, were the words, "Regarding Clara's birthday." Again, Miles had written, "Dad never wanted anyone to sort these papers." I read the sentence until my eyes burned. Then I turned off the phone. The past had waited almost 3 decades. It could wait until I was strong enough to meet it, without becoming trapped inside it. By spring, my family had created a new explanation for me. According to my mother, I had become unstable after receiving my bonus. According to my father, professional success had made me arrogant. According to several relatives, I had always been jealous of Miles and had finally allowed that jealousy to destroy the family. The story spread because it was easier to repeat than the truth. At church, Reverend Wallace delivered a sermon about adult children who abandoned family unity for pride. My name was never mentioned. It did not need to be. Cousin Elaine called in the tone of someone who enjoyed delivering bad news. "People are concerned, are they? Your mother says you refuse to speak to anyone." "I speak to many people. You know what I mean." "Yes, I do." I ended the conversation. Months earlier, the rumors would have consumed me. I would have called every relative, explained every detail, and tried to win a trial no one intended to hear honestly. Instead, I saved the messages and returned to my life. At Horizon, I was promoted to senior director. At the lake house, the deck was repaired and the kitchen plumbing replaced. In therapy, I learned that refusing to defend myself to people committed to misunderstanding me was not surrender. It was conservation. Miles sans occasionnel message. He did not ask for money. He did not mention Regent Tech. His firm failed to win the account, and his promotion remained under review for months. He eventually kept the title after securing several smaller clients through his own work. The Evanston redevelopment entered litigation. My parents were unlikely to recover more than a fraction of their investment. For the first time, Miles faced consequences no one could quietly remove. Jessica agreed to attend marriage counseling only after he gave her complete access to their finances. They remained separated through most of the summer. In late August, almost 1 year had passed since the birthday my family forgot. My mother invited me to another Sunday dinner. Her message read, "Family only. No arguments. We need one final conversation." I showed it to Dr. Levine. "What do you want from the meeting?" she asked. "Nothing. That may be the healthiest reason you have had for attending." I went because I wanted to see whether anything had changed. I carried no albums, no spreadsheets, no diary pages, only my coat and car keys. The dining room looked exactly the same. My father at the head of the table, my mother beside him, Miles and Jessica opposite me, with an empty chair between them. But the balance had shifted. Miles looked tired. Jessica's posture was guarded. My mother's smile seemed fragile. Dinner began with forced politeness. Then my father cleared his throat. "We have tolerated this situation long enough." I placed my fork down. "What situation?" "The image you are projecting. My life is not a public relations campaign for the Whitmore family. That attitude is the problem." My mother leaned toward me. "People are asking why you bought a separate house, why you exclude us from gatherings, and why you no longer attend church." I bought a house because I wanted one. I invite people I trust. I stopped attending church because Reverend Wallace used his pulpit to discuss a private conflict he does not understand. "He was speaking generally," she said. "Then our relatives have a remarkable ability to recognize themselves in general sermons." My father ignored the remark. "You have embarrassed the family, but the damage can still be corrected." "How?" "You can clarify publicly that the financial disagreement was a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate deception. Do not use dramatic language. You invented a party expense to obtain money from me." My mother dabbed her mouth with a napkin. "We were desperate. You were ashamed." "Clara," she whispered, "your father's health has suffered." My father appeared healthy enough to dominate the room. "Do not make his health my responsibility." Her eyes filled with tears. "You have become so hard." "No, I have become specific." My father's voice rose. "You will apologize to your mother." "For what?" "For tearing this family apart." Miles suddenly placed both hands on the table. "Stop." Everyone looked at him. My father's face darkened. "Excuse me?" I said stop. Miles's voice shook, but he continued. "This is not Clara's fault." My mother stared at him. "Miles, you are upset." "I am ashamed." He looked at Jessica first. "I borrowed money from Mom and Dad for the investment. I told them the return was almost guaranteed. When it failed, I asked them to cover the payments until I could repair the situation." Jessica's expression remained still. She had heard the facts before, but perhaps not the words spoken in front of his parents. Miles turned toward me. "I knew they were asking you for money." My father interrupted. "You do not need to explain private matters." "I do." Miles looked older than he had at the promotion party. "I knew they were calling it an anniversary contribution. I told myself it was their idea. I did not stop them." He swallowed. "I asked Clara to use her professional relationship because I was afraid of losing the promotion. I expected her to protect me because everyone always has." The admission did not erase my anger, but it changed the room. My father stared at him as though he had committed a betrayal. My mother whispered, "We were helping you. You were lying for me. We were protecting the family." "No," Miles said. "You were protecting the version of me you show everyone." My father pushed back his chair. "After everything we have done for you?" Miles flinched. That sentence had always been aimed at me. Now he heard it as a weapon. He looked toward the albums still resting on the side table. I read Grandma's papers. My mother became motionless. My father's voice turned dangerous. "You had no right to go through those boxes. They were abandoned in storage. They were private. They concerned both of us." My father stood. "You will return everything." "No." The refusal shocked the room. Miles had never challenged him publicly. My father turned toward me. "This is what you wanted. You have poisoned your brother against us." I did not open the box. You filled his head with resentment. I left him with photographs. Miles stood. "She left me with evidence." My father's face became crimson. If either of you walks out with those papers, do not come back. I rose. That threat has lost its power. He looked at me. If you leave now, Clara, you are no longer part of this family. You call me family when you need access to something I have. I placed my napkin beside the plate and walked toward the foyer. Behind me, chairs moved. My mother called my name. My father shouted at Miles. The door closed behind me. Cold evening air filled my lungs. I reached my car before I heard footsteps. Clara. Miles crossed the driveway, his coat unbuttoned. I turned. He did not look like the golden sun. He looked like a man discovering that the pedestal beneath him had been built from someone else's absence. I am sorry, he said. I waited. For the money, Regent, the party, everything. That is a beginning. I know it is not enough. No. He nodded. I brought copies of some documents. They are in my car. I am not reading them tonight. Okay. And you do not receive forgiveness because you admitted the truth after the lie failed. I understand. Do you? His eyes lowered. I am trying to. I studied him. The apology was imperfect. But it did not contain a demand. He removed Grandma's brass key from his pocket. She kept their replies, he said. My chest tightened. What replies? Letters? Notes? Copies of things they wrote back to her. What do they say? He looked toward the house. Then he turned back to me. What they wrote changes everything we believed about those years. The night seemed to narrow around us. I had spent most of my life asking why my parents could not remember me. Miles had found an answer, but he had not yet told me whether the truth would hurt less than the question. Nearly 1 year after the birthday I spent alone, I woke in the lake house to sunlight moving across the bedroom floor. I was 29. For several seconds, I remained beneath the quilt Mrs. Bennet had made and listened to the water beyond the windows. Then, something crashed downstairs. Jasmine shouted, "Nothing is broken." Another object fell. "Almost nothing is broken." I smiled. The kitchen was already full when I entered. Jasmine stood beside a cake decorated with pale blue frosting. Devon arranged pastries on a wooden board. Mrs. Bennet supervised from a chair near the window. 30 candles waited on the cake. One for each of my 29 years, and one for luck. Senior Director Whitmore has arrived, Devon announced. Jasmine handed me coffee. How does it feel to be ancient? I am younger than you. Not emotionally. The house filled gradually. Colleagues arrived with food. Neighbors brought flowers. Lawrence Grant stopped by and congratulated me again on my promotion. No one had been ordered to attend. No one was there to protect a family image. They came because they wanted to celebrate me. Shortly before noon, tires moved across the gravel driveway. The conversations inside softened. Miles stepped from his car carrying a wrapped package and Grandma Eleanor's wooden box. He wore no suit, only dark trousers and a light sweater. He looked uncertain. I had invited him for 1 hour. Not because everything between us had healed. Because over the previous weeks, he had respected every boundary I established. He corrected relatives who blamed me. He continued therapy. He maintained the repayment agreement with our parents. He stopped asking me to reassure him that he was a good person. Jessica had returned to their apartment on a trial basis, but only after Miles completed a financial disclosure and agreed that she would share control over all major decisions. He walked onto the deck. Happy birthday. Thank you. He offered the wrapped package first. Inside was a restored photograph. I was 7 years old, sitting on the tire, swing behind Grandma's house. My hair flew behind me. My mouth was open in an unguarded laugh. I had forgotten the photograph existed. Grandma kept the negative, Miles said. I had it restored. My eyes burned. Why this one? Because you look happy. I was happy at Grandma's. I know. His answer contained no defense. Only recognition. I placed the photograph on the mantel. Then I looked at the wooden box. Are you sure? No, he said. But you deserve to decide what happens to these. We carried the box into the small study and closed the door. Inside were dozens of envelopes tied with faded ribbons, birthday cards, copies of letters, calendar pages, notes in Grandma's handwriting. Miles had arranged them chronologically. The first letter was dated shortly before my 9th birthday. Richard and Margaret. Clara's birthday is next Thursday. She mentioned that Miles has a tournament, but I hope you will not ask her to postpone her celebration again. A child should not learn that her important days are movable, simply because her brothers are not. Beneath Grandma's letter was a copy of my mother's reply. Eleanor, we know the date. Miles's tournament affects his school placement, while Clara's dinner can happen on any evening. She is more flexible and understands these matters better than most children. I read the words twice. She is more flexible. I had been 9. The next exchange concerned the university tour during my 17th birthday weekend. Grandma wrote, Clara says you are leaving her with me while the 3 of you travel. I love having her, but she should not be excluded because the trip focuses on Miles. She is considering colleges as well. Why can she not come? My father's response was shorter. This trip is an investment in Miles's future. Bringing Clara would distract from the purpose and increase the cost. She has different needs and will find her own path. My hands began shaking. Miles sat opposite me without speaking. There were letters about school concerts my parents missed. A debate award I received that was never displayed because Miles's trophies occupied the cabinet. A family vacation to Europe. Grandma had offered to pay part of my airfare so I could join them. My mother declined. Clara does not enjoy structured travel. She will be happier with you. I remembered begging to go. The lie remained preserved in her handwriting. Then I found the exchange written before my college graduation. Grandma asked my parents to allow me one dinner without redirecting attention toward Miles's engagement. My father replied, Miles's announcement concerns the future of the Whitmore family. Clara's degree is a personal accomplishment and should not require the entire family to reorganize itself. I placed the page on the desk. For years, I had imagined my parents overwhelmed, distracted, or unaware. The letters removed that mercy. They had been reminded. They had been warned. Someone they respected had explained exactly how their decisions were hurting me. They understood. They continued. Near the bottom of the box was a handwritten note Grandma had made after a telephone conversation. Spoke to Margaret again. She says Clara is strong and therefore needs less. I told her strength in a child is often only quiet pain that adults find convenient. I covered my mouth. Miles looked toward the window. I am sorry. You did not write these. No. But I lived inside the benefits. You were a child. I stopped being a child long before I started asking questions. That was true. He pushed another envelope toward me. This is the one I could barely finish. The page was a draft in my father's handwriting, apparently written after Grandma threatened to confront him in front of other relatives. Eleanor, you insist on treating the children as though they have identical roles. They do not. Miles will carry the name, the business relationships, and the expectations attached to this family. Clara will marry, build her own life, and likely become part of another family. It is rational to direct resources toward the child who will preserve the Whitmore legacy. I stopped reading. For several seconds, I heard only my breathing. I had spent 28 years asking what was wrong with me. The answer had never been about me. My father had viewed me as a temporary member of my own family. Useful when needed. Expendable when resources were distributed. Miles spoke carefully. Grandma wrote a response. I unfolded it. Richard, a daughter does not become less yours because you imagine she may marry. A son does not become more valuable because he carries your surname. If you continue this way, Clara will one day understand that she was never difficult, forgettable, or insufficient. She will understand that the failure belonged entirely to you. I pressed the paper against the desk. Grandma had known. Before I did, she had left the truth waiting for me, not to trap me in bitterness, to release me from the belief that I had caused my neglect. Miles looked at the box. Dad still refuses to discuss the letters. That sounds like him. Mom wants to see you. I know. She said she might come today. I looked up sharply. I did not invite her. I told her. Then why would she come? She said she would remain outside unless you allowed her in. I stood. Anger rose quickly. but it did not control me. I need air. We returned to the main room. The party had continued, though Jasmine watched my face carefully. I stepped onto the deck. The lake glittered beneath the afternoon sun. Several minutes later, another car stopped in the driveway. My mother emerged alone. No pearls. No carefully coordinated dress. She wore a simple gray coat and held a bakery box in both hands. She stopped at the bottom of the deck stairs. Clara. Every protective instinct in Jasmine activated behind me. I lifted one hand slightly, telling her I was all right. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Not because she had physically changed, because I no longer saw her through the eyes of a child. I know I was not invited, she said. That is correct. I will leave if you ask. What is in the box? A cupcake. She opened it. Carrot cake with cream cheese frosting. My favorite. Most of my life, she had ordered vanilla because Miles disliked carrot cake. My mother closed the box. I remember, she said. The words carried more weight than she intended. Yes, I replied. You do. Her face crumpled. Miles showed me copies of the letters. You did not need copies. You wrote some of them. I know. Why? She looked toward the lake. Your father believed Miles's future represented all of us. And you? I believed keeping peace with your father was the same as protecting the family. At my expense. Yes. The answer was barely audible. I waited. You were quiet, she continued. Capable. You adapted. Every time you survived something, I used your survival as evidence that it had not hurt you. My eyes burned. Grandma told you. Repeatedly. You knew I was waiting at Angelo's. Yes. You knew I wanted to go on the university trip. Yes. You knew I did not want Miles's engagement announced at my graduation dinner. Her tears fell. Yes. The truth hurt. But unlike her old excuses, it did not confuse me. Then why are you here? To apologize without asking you to make me feel better. She inhaled shakily. I chose comfort over courage. I allowed your father's beliefs to become family policy because challenging him would have made my life harder. I called you strong because your strength made my cowardice easier to live with. I said nothing. I am not asking you to forgive me, she continued. I am not asking to enter the house. I wanted to tell you that I remembered. I remembered more than I admitted. Every time I chose Miles anyway, I failed you. Behind me, the house remained quiet. My chosen family waited without interfering. My mother held out the bakery box. I accepted it. For years, I had imagined her apology as a dramatic moment that would repair the past. No words could repair it. An apology could only show whether repair might begin. You may stay for cake, I said. Hope flashed across her face. I raised one hand. This is not forgiveness. I understand. It is not a return to the way things were. I do not want the way things were. You will not discuss Dad with me. You will not ask me to reconcile with him. You will not use Miles to deliver messages. You will not arrive here without permission again. She nodded after each condition. If you lie to protect the family's image, I will step away. I understand. I moved aside. My mother walked onto the deck. No one rushed to welcome her. Jasmine offered a polite greeting. Mrs. Bennet watched her with open suspicion. Miles remained several feet away. My mother entered a room where she did not control the story. She sat quietly. She listened. When the candles were lit, no one redirected attention toward Miles. No one announced another achievement. No one asked me to share the moment. 30 flames flickered above the blue frosting. Everyone sang. I looked around the room. At Jasmine, Devon, Mrs. Bennet, Lawrence, my colleagues and neighbors. Miles, standing quietly near the back. My mother, crying without demanding comfort. Then I looked at the restored photograph of the child on the tire swing. Grandma had been right. I had never been difficult. I had never been forgettable. I had never been insufficient. The failure belonged to them. I closed my eyes and blew out the candles. I did not wish for my family to choose me. Their choice could no longer determine what I deserved. After the last guest left, I carried a glass of wine onto the deck. The sun hovered above Lake Michigan, casting amber light across the water. Behind me, The house glowed through wide windows. Inside were photographs of my accomplishments, the quilt Mrs. Bennet made, and the restored image of the child I had once been. Grandma's letters rested safely in my study. They did not erase the past. They returned the blame to its rightful owners. For years, I had carried my parents' failure as evidence against myself. Every forgotten birthday became proof that I was not lovable enough. Every celebration of Miles became proof that I was not impressive enough. Every request for money became an opportunity to purchase the belonging I had never received freely. Now I understood. Love that required my disappearance was not love. Forgiveness, if it came one day, would not mean forgetting. It would not refill the empty album or return the birthdays I spent waiting. It would only mean the past no longer controlled the boundaries of my future. Miles still had work to do. My mother had taken one honest step. My father had chosen pride and remained outside my life. I no longer needed any of them to complete my story. I raised the glass toward the lake. To the people who chose me, I whispered. Then I looked back at the home I had selected, financed and rebuilt with my own hands. To my sanctuary. Finally, I lifted the glass toward my reflection in the balcony door. And to me, I had spent most of my life waiting for my family to choose me. In the end, freedom began when I became the first person I chose.